And welcome to Freedom Train International Live Special Report. Good evening, everybody. I'm joined with Liz Gunner, Ambassador from New Zealand. I'm also here with Tom Marazzo from Canada. And I'm here with Barbara O'Neill and her husband from Australia. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see you all here. Liz, I'm going to hand on to you straight away because you're going to run this segment. I'm just here for eye candy, I guess. But I'm going to be here for the full episode as well. But Liz, it's going to be an exciting night tonight. We've got a lot to cover.
It's wonderful, Jim, and welcome to our guests. When I spoke to you last night, Jim, to say that Barbara and Michael had agreed to come on at the last minute, and they're actually not in Australia at the moment. They're in Dublin, where Barbara has been talking all day. And Barbara, you're no doubt fairly tired, but you agreed to do this because it gets your message out to the world. But when I spoke to Jim last night about you coming on, I said, this is a program on prepping. And often prepping can be very, very dark because the premise of prepping is, what if the world does go dark? And there was a very dark video I had that I was thinking of playing where the video was done through AI, and it showed what happens to the world if they turn off all of our connectedness here and how people would be thrown and what would we do then. But the contrast with that, Barbara and Michael, was you coming on because, Barbara, yours is a very, very positive message, is it not? Could you tell everybody here and those who will watch this in the days to come just what your mission has been as summarized in this wonderful book, which is Barbara O'Neill, and it's called Sustain Me. What inspired you to write this book, and what inspires you in your 70s to do the work you're doing, Barbara?
What inspires me really started when I was probably in my mid-20s, not wanting to give drugs to my little children and starting to explore, are there other things that you can do? And the old lady next door, she's the first person that told me about it, onion poultice. And it worked so well that really started my journey of looking at simple natural remedies that you can do to your body, to your children, when they get little bits and pieces happening. So they scratch their finger, they get an earache, they got a cough. And I've also felt that frustration of not wanting to give drugs, not wanting to hurt my child, but not knowing what to do. Well, the good news is I know what to do. And so it is with great joy that I travel the world speaking to sometimes thousands of people. In fact, last week or week before last, I think it was 4,500 at the Optimum Health Summit. That thrills me because all those people are hearing what I longed to hear when I was in my mid-20s. What can I do when my child is sick?
And in your premise to your book, and we need to preface this program with this, you make no claim to give medical advice at all. You're simply saying these are just little hints you can do if you don't have other avenues and you want to help your own family, aren't they, Barbara? Little ideas.
Absolutely. And I'm not eliminating the doctor, Most doctors are good guys. They're ethical guys and certainly go and get an opinion. But when you have that opinion, you can go home and you can look into Sustain Me and look at some alternate things that you can do. Simple things that are not going to be damaging or dangerous for your child. No, this is not medical advice. This is grandma advice.
Yes, it's wonderful. Michael, could you tell us a little bit about you? And then we're going to get Tom, you to introduce yourself. Michael, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself here too.
Sure. Well, I've been running health retreats for 38 years, about 10 years before I actually married Barbara. And of course, I'm also the founder and leader of a political party in Australia called the Heart Party, which we are very focused on giving medical freedom of choice to Australian citizens to be able to decide what they're going to do with their body. We pay a Medicare subsidy out of our wages, and yet we're eliminated. We have to take this one government-sanctioned remedy for everything. It has to come through a pharmaceutical method. Either, I always say they have three lines. It's either medicate, radiate, or operate. And in fact, you become almost an enemy of state if you choose to say, well, I reject that. I might just try some lifestyle changes. And it's like, oh, what a dreadful decision. You're a threat to the well-being of our country. No, I'll say we're fighting for that in the political party as well, to maintain people's freedom of choice.
Michael, I think at this point it's really important to explain to Tom up in Canada the price that Barbara has paid for giving grandma advice to the world, that if the world did all stop tomorrow, we could still use her book, Sustain Me, to help our families be well. So what is the price Barbara's had to pay for doing this innocent thing?
Of course, there's a group that really is basically a pharmaceutical mouthpiece in Australia called the Friends of Science in Medicine, and they started a complaint campaign against this dear lady to the Healthcare Complaints Commission of New South Wales, which is a government body that basically investigates malpractice by practitioners. If you go into if you go in there to get your right leg cut off and they cut off the leg, that's an extreme, the left leg. So the complaints were, she recommends goat's milk for mothers who cannot breastfeed their children. She was offering lifestyle alternatives to maybe having chemotherapy. She was saying you need to educate before you vaccinate. She wasn't saying don't vaccinate. She said just educate yourself before you vaccinate. And that was considered a dire threat to the well-being of Australia. And so she was given a permanent prohibition order against giving health advice, either in a paid capacity or a voluntary capacity in Australia. That's where Australia's at.
And if people watching this want to know, Jim, the importance of Barbara O'Neill, it's in that if what she said wasn't absolutely the truth, if she wasn't right over target, I'm sure they wouldn't have done that to her. What's your reaction when you hear that, Jim?
Well, absolutely. They don't like anybody that goes off piece. They don't like anyone that goes against the government narrative. But what Barbara's doing is absolutely remarkable. And I have to say, I know so many people that watch and read Barbara, watch her podcasts, read her books, even family members. And I actually told some of them that Barbara was coming on tonight, so they're probably going to be tuning in. I just want to say also, it's great to see you, Michael. You and I did a great interview on the Heart Party. It did very well. There was a lot of interest, Michael, so I'm really pleased that you're here as well. So yes, I think when we look at these things and when you see that kind of overreaction from the state apparatus, then it shows that you're clearly over the target. So well done to you, Barbara. We're all rooting for you.
I know you're a woman of great faith, Barbara, but how do you react to your your own country, basically banning your work and making it so difficult for you to live in Australia? So you as a result are traveling the world, lecturing to people, not lecturing, talking, advising, inspiring people around the world. How do you feel, though, about your own country?
Well, when it first happened, I cried. I was heartbroken because all I've ever wanted to do was help people. And the thousands of people that have come through our door, no one's ever been hurt. And I stopped after 10 minutes and I thought, okay, God has allowed this. God must have another plan. And I waited to see what it was. And my husband said, well, you can do three things, Barbara. One of three things. You can retire your retirement age, or we can go to court, which was a little bit of a scary thought for me, and would start at $500,000. So that wasn't attractive. Or you can travel. Now, all my children are grown. I have a lot of grandchildren, but no one lives actually at our property. So even if I visit them, I travel. So I said, I'll go overseas. And so this is my 5th year of traveling 9 months of the year. But something happened to me in 2021. I was in Germany speaking at a conference, and a lady came up and she said, I'm sorry to say this, Barbara, but we are so glad that you were banned because it has freed you to come to us. And at that point, my light bulb moment happened. The ban has actually freed me. It's actually opened the door for my message to go so much further than if I was still at Misty Mountain as the health director.
It's extraordinary. God works in mysterious ways. Tom, you also do really wonderful work in the world. And if you could introduce yourself, please, that would be great from Canada.
Sure. But before I do, I do want to say two things that comes to mind listening to this story. Is the first and foremost is that there's a saying, and I'm sure you know this, is that if you treat your food like medicine, you won't have to take medicine with your food. And so I think that's a pretty important thing. And a lot of people probably believe that. And honestly, it's amazing to me that the human race has ever thrived or flourished or even grown without the amazing interventions of the pharmaceutical industries. And I'm saying that with as much sarcasm as humanly possible. Like, where would we have been as a species if it wasn't for Big Pharma, right?
Yep, that's right.
So, yeah, anyway, for me, yes, I'm in Canada. I'm just in the Toronto area. And I saw some of the comments on terrible. I often call it unterrible because it truly is. And I'm retired military. I left the military 10 years ago. Actually, I retired and I went back to school, became got a degree in software, immediately started teaching after that, taught for a few months in the classroom, and then COVID hit and we, went into lockdowns here in Canada. But 18 months after the first lockdown, almost to the day, I was fired because I would not participate in a global pharmaceutical medical experiment. And so I lost my job. And a few months later, there was a great group of Canadians that descended on Ottawa and protested the federal government's vaccine mandates here in Ottawa. And so unfortunately, it has gotten me into a little bit of trouble. I don't have any criminal charges pending against me, but I am one of 20 people, including the main organizers of the Freedom Convoy, that are being sued for $290 million for horn honking and I think diesel fumes, and something about phantom honking in people's minds and microaggressions, something to do with that. But yeah, this has been 3.5 years that we've been dealing with this lawsuit, and we're lucky we're represented by a law firm in Canada called the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They've been taking care of us, but we did several months ago have an enormous legal bill to pay. We had to pay costs to the lawyer suing us to the tune of $20,000. And what's amazing is that the public responded in 9 hours, 15 minutes and helped us. We crowdfunded the money. Canadians were not too afraid to use Give, Send, Go. And so the public in Canada responded and they helped us out with $20,000. And one individual actually donated $5,000 to us. So yeah, that's where my life has been. And I've written a book about my time at the convoy. And I've written another book based on my Substack. But my third book that I published in May is called The People's Emergency Plan. So as I mentioned, I'm retired military, and I was a planner for the military. I'm trained in the same process. And so I thought, you know what, this process that the military, all NATO militaries use, all emergency management organizations use, it's all the same process. I'm going to civilianize it and I'm going to give it to the public because they've never had this before. And I know for a fact that it actually works because I've used it and I've been a part of this process, my career in the military as an officer. So I thought that I had a responsibility to take this knowledge that I was given, and I know that it works, and share it with the public. And so that's what I've done with this latest book. And that's a lot about me.
That's what we're going to move into now, as it's a program on prepping, but your story is fascinating. Just before we do that, Jim, I know that the Canadian truckers really are the inspiration for this show. And before we come to you, Barbara and Michael, do you remember the effect of those Canadian truckers heading across Canada with people waving flags all along the sidewalk? I think we all thought this nonsense is going to stop. This madness will stop.
I was so encouraged by it, and horrified by the government's reaction, encouraged by that people were standing up, because we were doing similar actions, not on that grand scale in Australia, but it was very, very encouraging, and what was happening.
Oh, yeah, it really was. In fact, we tried to get one going here. We've got a truck, not a huge one. Michael jumped in it and he said, I'm driving down to Canberra. But it was all very much inspired by what happened in Canada. I think worldwide people were inspired. The problem with Australia is most trucks are owned by big companies, and the drivers of the trucks, if they took the truck to the protest, they'd lose their jobs. So we didn't quite get the numbers that Canada got.
Jim, that is true, isn't it? That it was the Canadian truckers that really are the foundational inspiration for Freedom Train International to exist. We seem to have lost Jim. I'd like to go back to you, Tom, just a number for people or an address for people to be able to donate before we move into the prepping side of this hour.
Well, we've actually, we did reach that goal. This was a couple of months ago. We reached the goal. We actually had to pay the bill already. We've done so. And
but you'll have future bills. You will have future bills.
We may have future bills. And when the time comes, we will do another crowdfunding campaign. And because right now there are 20 of us that are named on this ridiculous lawsuit. There is some talk that if it's actually a class action lawsuit, if you can believe it. And so if this does continue to go forward, if the class gets certified in the courts and the courts allow it to proceed, then there is a potential that this lawyer will open up the number of people that are going to be named in this lawsuit. And it's funny because they actually even named the owner, Jacob Wells, of the platform that we used to raise the money for the convoy the second time. So you had GoFundMe. The government of Ontario seized that money. Give Send Go didn't seize the money, or the government. What they did is they put pressure on Give Send Go, caused a bit of a controversy. And I'm sorry, I might be getting these wrong, but GoFundMe was the first platform. They basically canceled us. There was some uproar. The money was returned. And within a few days, we were back up to over $10 million through a platform called Give Send Go. And that's owned by Jacob Wells. And that platform is also being named in this lawsuit. So, but I use Give Send Go to raise the $20,000 to help us fight that, or to pay that legal bill that the courts forced us to pay to the lawyer that is suing all of us.
We'll follow that closely, and we'll put links for following you underneath this. Barbara, that really leaves us, I think that story leaves the people of the world wondering, what can we do to stop the globalists in their rampant attempts to oppress the people of the world? And where Jim and I and this program comes in, there is much that people can do to be independent of governments themselves. So let's begin perhaps with your book, Sustain Me. You talk about 9 principles of health, and I believe one of the best prepping ideas is to make ourselves as healthy as we can be. Would you agree, Barbara?
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. It's not the odd day you do it or the odd day you don't. It's what you do every day that really establishes the health status of your body. And if you can be independent of that medical system, it's very powerful. And what I find is the power of one, just for one person to take control of their health. And what it entails is starting to listen to your body, starting to observe when it's not going right, or the colon, the digestion, the sleep, just these simple things. That's the sustain me principles. It's just starting there, and the power of one. And that's what I found as a young mother. All my friends were taking their children to the doctor, but I never did. I just did the simple natural remedies. And one by one, they'd start to say, well, what do you do? Well, what do you do when they get sick? Well, what do you do when they've got this? And that's when I started to share. And I found it difficult for them. So I decided as a young mother, I'm going to give meetings. And I'd take all the kids along and I'd wrap them up in charcoal and onions and put their feet in water. And that was 1992 when I started doing that. And that's really how it grows, little by little by little. And the power of one person to just make a stand, one person to take control of their own health is a very powerful thing. And never underestimate the effect of your witness on your neighbours, on your friends, on your family.
Jim, your reaction to that? It's what FTI is about, isn't it? Oh, we're having a little bit of trouble with Jim's sound. You might be muted there, Jim. Just see if you can unmute. It may come back. There's been a little bit of interference with our links today, which is interesting, Barbara. You're obviously a very powerful force, and somebody wants to interfere. Just while Jim... Oh, there we are, Jim.
That's fine. Several things I would say. First of all, Freedom Train International took its inspiration from the Canadian Freedom Convoy movement. I was incredibly inspired and very honoured to meet the leaders when I went to Ottawa a number of years ago. And what they achieved was really, well, it was world leading. They were the first nation to really mobilise in the way that they did. And I pay tribute to Tom and those like him who were involved in that, because they used their skills, their organisational abilities to help coordinate it. And of course, once again, we saw a massive overreaction by the Canadian authorities. But yes, on Barbara's point, absolutely right. It's incredibly important that people understand that a big part of preparedness is in fact making sure that you are fit and healthy, not just physically, but in mentally, physically, spiritually. These are the sort of the key areas where we must always be as prepared as we can be. I think it's more important than ever to recognize why preparedness matters. The lessons from recent years, the lockdowns, the empty shelves, the grid instability, the fuel shortages, these are a number of things. And I think tonight we're going to focus in on what people can actually do. It's a big subject, and we're going to try and cram in as much as we can. But yes, I think when the system fails us, and let's face it, the medical system completely failed the planet. Doctors who went along with the mRNA shots, that tried to ban ivermectin and other very safe medications, they were taking the money rather than concentrating and focusing on people's health. They were just going along with the narrative as so many of them did. Not all of them, of course. But I think it's very important that people understand that when you're prepared, when you improve your health, when you're looking at what you're eating, when you are having a hedge of protection around yourself, that actually changes your mental thinking. It actually takes the fear factor away. It gives you confidence to know that you're going to be all right, even if it's just for a period of time. And as I always say, something is better than nothing. We have our motto, Liz, in Freedom Train International, it's don't be scared, be prepared. So what Barbara and Tom are talking about is absolutely fundamental to this whole narrative.
It's wonderful. And I'd like to actually go to you, Michael, what you think you've learned from your wonderful wife's teachings about perhaps the top 3 ways to prepare. And before we do that, I'll just say my 28-year-old son has been experimenting with 2 and 3 day fasts. And he said to me what he's learned from it is there is no fear in him anymore of going without food for a few days. And I think that is something we could all play with. Michael, I'd like your views of what you think your top 3 prepper ideas from Barbara would be.
Oh, well, locating yourself into a place where you can actually have freedom to walk, even to grow and experiment with plants. Definitely eating well. 90% of our woes are what we eat. The the problem is what goes into our mouth. The solution is what goes into our mouth. It's one and the same thing. It just needs a change. And maintaining a lifestyle. Barbara's been so helpful to me. I mean, when I first married, I had some health problems, and I told her, even though I was running health retreats, managing them, I said, there's some things here that are just systemic. They cannot be healed. And she said, I can fix them. And I'll be, oh, yes, what will I do? And then she told me this diet. Well, I'm going to take you'll have to go off all sweet things, even fruits for a little while. I said, oh, yeah, okay, good. Look, I'll think about that. We'll do that sometime. And this went on for years. And I got to a point, I said, I can't take it anymore. And in, how long was it? 1 month or 2 months? 2 months of this, I just went on a sort of a radical fasting diet, still eating, but just austere, eliminating a lot of the things I was eating. And honestly, all my afflictions disappeared. Just everything went. And now I feel I'm completely in control of my health. And
that is beautiful.
A victory. And you mentioned about eating. Like, I've just been traveling, and I often go to places and I think the food's appalling. It doesn't matter to me. I think, I just won't eat till tomorrow. I'll just drink some more water. It's no big deal. We've become a nation as we feel a pang of hunger. There's a crisis. And I've just been on plane rides where I'm just looking at them incessantly eating. They're not only eating everything that they dish up on the plane, they're putting into their bag, and it's more and more. And I think, oh, you poor stomachs. You give them a rest. So, there's a bundle of things I've said in there, but definitely being located well. And Barbara and I are both great advocates of trying to live in the country, away from being completely reliant on just all the services. Because today we've become so reliant on all the services that we'd actually be marooned. And if they get cut off and think it's the end of the world. I love what Kirk said. He said for 1 day a week, he put up his phones. He just disconnected. He had a personal disconnect from life for the Sabbath every day. And I've thought of that. And even though I do keep the Sabbath, I thought, this is where I've got to actually move better. We've got to discipline ourselves to be not so reliant on social media and our phones, and we don't control them, that they actually start to control us.
Gosh, there's a lot in there. Tom, your reaction to that, and is some of that in your book, which I will be buying, and I'm sure many others will be. Your reaction hearing that?
Yeah, in myself, I've even been changing my diet for well over a year now, and I do intermittent fasting. In fact, yesterday I was fasting yesterday, and I'm very aware, much more aware now of the things. When I look at food, yes, I still have cravings. I'm still kind of in that sort of phase of it, but I'm also looking at things that are going to spike my insulin. And so when I look at food from that perspective, is that have the potential to spike my insulin, then I give it a second chance. It's just kind of my everyday, should I eat that? Shouldn't I do that? And so that's kind of where I'm at in my journey with food, because I agree. Like I did 25 years in the Army. I have aches and pains everywhere, including my hip and my lower back, especially. And so my diet is actually very important in terms of managing my chronic pain that I have. And so I think that this is an important thing to really, really focus on your diet, because diet, whether you're a prepper or you're a homesteader or however you want to classify it, you always have to consider your food, because now you're getting into, if it's an emergency, you're dealing with calories. If it's not an emergency, if you're homesteading, and I agree, I would much prefer to live full-time on my land, but that gives you that freedom to understand where your food comes from. And I think that's a pretty important thing too, because most of the time we go to the store, we have no idea where that food comes from, who's touched it, what journey that food has been on, and how many chemicals have been inadvertently added to those just on the journey alone, from where they were grown to the store to your own home. And so I think all of these things go hand in hand. And in terms of preparedness, you really should spend a lot of time focusing on your nutrition, because in an emergency, calories absolutely count, and not the garbage ones, the ones that are going to sustain you. So I think this is important.
So what would you have? What do you recommend in your book? And then Barbara, I'd like your reaction.
Well, I if I'm looking at an emergency, I do want to look at instead of, let's say, preserved foods, things that are meant to go in there. And I'm talking chemically preserved foods and stuff. I have a friend who owns a freeze dryer, and this freeze dryer, it's a very expensive piece of equipment. And so what a bunch of us have decided to do was all sort of come together, and we're going to do a weekend, sort of similar to what people do when they have a canning weekend. But these types of food where you know where it came from, you understand the calories, the types, what's important, what supports fasting, what supports keeping your insulins down. These types of things I think are really important. And obviously in an emergency situation, you want them to be compact, you want to be nutrient dense, and you want them to be lightweight. Because if you do have to move with them, it can't be too big, right? So I think food, and even in the book, I do have a chapter in the book that talks about calories, your calorie count to sustain you per day. It's a calorie calculator type of a thing. But again, I want to stress, it's got to be the right type of calories, not the garbage stuff. I think that's important too.
Barbara, your reaction here, one of the things that I think shocked many of us when the pandemic was first declared, was the naked panic and the grabbing of food off shelves and toilet paper, people fighting over that. It was awful. And I realized looking back, they really tried to instill fear in people, and fear goes to panic. If we can stay calm because we're prepared, that will make such a difference, not to rush out to shops and buy rubbish food from the shelves, but to know that we've got something stored. So Barbara, perhaps your top 3 ideas for prepping food-wise.
Well, one food that I absolutely love, and you can have it in your cupboard for 10 years and it won't change, is the good old legumes, the beans. And they can look like a stone. And you think they might be a stone sitting in my jar because they don't change. But as soon as you soak them or even put a little bit of sun on them, life comes out in a sprout, or you cook them till they're soft. And I know when Michael and I, we've got 8 children, and we used to go camping, and we'd have lots of other kids as well. And when all their food had run out, I'd say, I'll cook now. They'd all run out of food because they had all the 2-minute noodles and the corn chips. And then I had the lentils. I had a few potatoes and I had the herbs and the oils, and I'd make beautiful food for them. So I love the legumes. I think they're a really good standby. So when there was panic buying, it was no panic buying for us because we had food in the garden. I had all my legumes in the cupboard, and also nuts. Nuts are a really dense nutrient food. Now, the 3 essential food groups are fiber, protein, and fat. And the nuts, they're great sources of fiber and protein and fats, but they're very concentrated. So I do warn people, don't overdo them. A friend of mine ate I think a kilo in a day, and now she's got an allergy to them. And I think, how sad. So yes, the average person can have about 10 nuts per meal. They last a long time. The legumes last a long time. And your fresh food, ideally grow it. Even if you're in an apartment, you can have pots that have got parsley and rocket and the fresh herbs. That's very important. And the oils, never forget the oils. We don't need much oils, but yes. I always try and, yes, I've got my trusty little tin of olive oil that I travel with. And that's, they also what you'd call nutrient-dense foods.
But Barbara, you also give some warnings about oils. I know that for me, I would have coconut oil as something to give energy if I could eat nothing else. That seems to be a very substantial one. Olive oil, of course, and castor oil. But what are the ones to avoid?
The cheap seed oils. You see, people didn't eat cheap seed oils because, as a housewife, I can't extract oil out of hard seeds. So it was in the Industrial Revolution that they developed high heat chemical equipment to extract oil from hard seeds. So in the very extraction process, those oils are totally destroyed. So I say to people, keep away from those cheap seed oils in clear plastic bottles. Go straight past them, keep walking till you get to the extra virgin, first cold pressed olive oil in the dark bottles or in the tins. And that, yes, it is concentrated. You don't need much. And so it may seem expensive, but they last a while. But keep away from the cheap seed oils. And two oils that are in my suitcase at this moment as I travel is the coconut oil and the olive oil.
Interesting. And honey is one that I've always thought, I mean, I know honey goes right back to Egyptian times. They found it in the tombs, and it hasn't denigrated as a product. So I do keep honey, but where's your view on that, given what Tom said about nothing that spikes insulin?
Well, that certainly can. Now, it really doesn't for me because my pancreas is strong and working well, but I still don't eat a lot of honey because it's a very, very concentrated food. Michael really doesn't eat honey at all because of the few problems that he had when we married. He does not go real with high sweet. We have honey in our cupboard at home for when the grandchildren arrive. I'm a very unusual grandmother because I don't give my grandchildren sweets or lollies, but when they visit, oh yes, I make apple pies, oh, I make raisin crackers. Yes, we do have some treats, and they can eat them after they've eaten all their vegetables.
That's beautiful. And for Tom saying that he has some aches and pains, now there are people who would go into a lockdown or a government-controlled lockdown who might panic. I can't see my doctor. I can't get my pills. How am I going to cope? This is a big question, Barbara. I mean, we're not advocating going off your medicines at all, but we're saying there are other options that can keep preppers, people who want to be prepared, calm. What would you advise to Tom to help with those aches and pains? Do you have an initial idea from all of your experience, your 40 plus years experience?
Well, there is a quite remarkable painkiller that might surprise most people. It's a natural analgesic, and it's cayenne pepper. And I was talking to a man, I was helping him save the tips of two of his fingers because his hand went through a roller. And the two tips of the fingers were starting to go black, and the doctor wanted to cut them off. And I said, hey, I believe we can save them. And so he'd get aloe vera and he'd sprinkle cayenne pepper on it and he'd wrap them over it. And the good news is he kept the tips of his fingers. But as you can imagine, very painful. And so he was taking high-dose cayenne pepper in capsules. I think he was taking 2 capsules 3 times a day, sometimes 4 times a day. And he said to me, he's an American, he said, it eased his pain better than Tylenol. And in America, Tylenol is your average pain-killing medication. So I thought that was quite remarkable.
That is remarkable. Jim, you've written a few books that are up on our Freedom Train International page. What are you picking up, and what questions do you have for our wonderful guests today?
Well, I think it's just wonderful to get people that have got experience and knowledge of what they're really talking about. It's so important for people who are listening in that they're taking notes, and also maybe to take a step back a little bit as well and think about, well, why should you be prepared? Well, the governments aren't there to protect us. I mean, maybe at one time they would have done, or those in government might have been, but government aren't there to save you, and they won't save you. Self-reliance is absolutely the key, because preparedness equals and equates to freedom itself. And whenever you're ready, you're harder to control. We touched on the fear factor, where people will make decisions when they're afraid that are usually the wrong decisions to make. So I think it's very important, as we will get into later on in the program, about the technicality aspects of what you actually need to do. And we've talked about freeze dryers. Freeze-dried food is the Rolls Royce of prepper food because of the process. And we can go through the details of it. People sometimes mix it up with dehydrated food. There is a big difference. although dehydrated food has its merits, of course, as well, depending on what it is you're putting aside. But there are a lot of aspects to preparedness. And one of the biggest obstacles to people getting ready and prepared is your own mind. It's overcoming those doubts, those little voices in your mind that say, oh, it's too complicated, it's going to be too expensive. I don't have the technical know-how. I don't have space for a big cupboard of food. All of these things are obstacles to actually getting you making that journey forward. And it's not that hard to do. The biggest step is making the conscious decision to actually do it. And if you start in a small, moderate way, when you get 3 days worth of foodstuffs and other medications and medical pack and all these things together, you then turn that into 3 weeks supply. Then the next target is 3 months supply. And then you want to try and get a year's worth together. But there are a lot of aspects to this, especially if you're on prescription medications, that you need to be aware of. And that's why books that Barbara O'Neill is writing is so incredibly important, because what she's doing is she's looking at alternative ways, not necessarily that prescribed by a doctor or a pharmacist.
It's wonderful. And Barbara, I think here we will go to those 9 principles that you outline in your book. Could you talk about that? And the book is wonderful. It starts literally at the head of the human body and runs through solutions. But could you just talk about those 9 principles people can really focus on, including plenty of sunshine and vitamin D?
Well, that's right. It was interesting. I was praying one morning saying, how am I going to put this book together? And the thought came to me, start at the head. And I went down the body. But the Sustain Me principles, the first one is sunshine. Sunshine is not the enemy in the sky. It's actually the doctor in the sky. And our brain needs sun, and it gets sun through the eyes. And I don't suggest we look at the sun, but just being outside, it's amazing the effect of those sun's rays through the eyes, touching the pineal gland, helping you sleep better at night, boosting your mood, touching your pituitary gland, helping with the hormones. There's a whole lot there. And the next one is use of water. Now, the reason I put use of water is because water can be used as a therapy, as well as the importance of keeping well hydrated. So we need at least 8 glasses of water a day. I say to people, start early. Go to bed with a glass of water next to your bed. Get used to water. Get used to taking it little by little. In my book, Sustain Me, I have a chapter on hydrotherapy. Did you know that nurses used to be taught hydrotherapy, which is water therapy, contrast baths, using ice for inflammation, using the alternating hot and colds. And at Misty Mountain, our guests have a steam sauna every afternoon. Then they dive in the mountain stream and back into the sauna. And this morning I was running up and down in Wexford, the sandhills, and then my friend and I dived into that Irish Sea. She reckons it's warm. It's not warm. So those cold plunges have the most amazing effect on the body. They boost the immune system. They also are like getting a blast of electricity. So use of water is referring to water therapies and drinking water. S is the second S in the Sustain Me principles is sleep.
Yes.
Start getting to bed a little bit early. In fact, those hours before midnight are powerful. You've got to try and grab at least 2 hours before midnight. In my book, I explain everything that happens in the night, and you'll be surprised at how our body's healing accelerates in those early hours. There's a cleaning system. So our brain and our body needs to be revived and recharged. The T is trust in divine power, trust in God. Trust that God gave us an incredible body that's got an inbuilt ability to heal itself, and it will heal itself if you're giving it the right conditions. And Jim, you mentioned a little bit earlier how when the body's working well, it's affecting the mind, it's affecting the emotions, spiritually. You can't cut it all off. It is all connected. But we've seen people conquer their depression by starting just getting better lifestyle habits. So that's quite incredible. So the A is abstain. There are some things that must stop. if you're looking for optimum performance. Now, to know what to stop, we need to know what's in that sunscreen. We need to know what's in that medication. We need to know what that caffeine, that alcohol is doing to us. Because as Nelson Mandela said, I'm the captain of my ship. I'm the master of my destiny. We are the ones that choose what goes in and what doesn't go in. So we need to know. The next one is I, and that's inhale through the nose, not the mouth. Mouth's for speaking, singing, talking, eating, but nose is for breathing. And our cells will receive about 18% more oxygen when we breathe through our nose, just the nose. And you can get mouth tape to help you or encourage you to breathe through your nose through the night. That can be put into your preparation kit, bit of mouth tape. And the next one is N, nutrition, high fiber. All plants have fiber, more plants, lots of fruits and vegetables, more legumes, soak them well. If you get bloated, we'll start with a teaspoon, 2 teaspoons next week, and you can slowly get your microbiome established and trained to be able to handle those legumes. And fats, great fats, avocados, olive, coconut oil, as we talked about, nuts and seeds. The me is moderation. Nuts are wonderful, but please don't overdo them. Yes, olive oil's good, but I don't know anyone that drinks a cup of olive oil a day. It's a bit hard to overdo that one. The time when people overdo oils is when they eat a lot of fried foods from the fish and chips shop, so to speak. They can be having almost a third of a cup of oil when the whole meal is just fried scallops, fried chips, all that frying. And there's sugar in the batter, so it masks that fatty taste. So beware of such things. And it's usually cheap seed oils, which are very dangerous. So moderation in all the good things. Moderation in the sunshine. Don't overdo the sunshine or you will get burned. There is some common sense there. And the last one is E for exercise. Now, the reason I ran up and down the hills by the sea this morning is because I had some very important lectures to deliver today, and I knew that I needed to be running up and down the hills. I got nice and hot in my nice winter woolies, and then we dived into that Irish Sea. You just feel like you're alive when you come out of that. I'm not in there long. The fishermen were nearby. I said, we didn't want to get caught up in their lines. I said, we won't be in there long. Just in and out quick. So they're the sustain me principles.
Not bad for 72 years old.
Not bad at all. A real testament to your own programs. Tom, when you hear that, for me, I do come back to that principle that a sound mind in a sound body, if we are calm and able to be clear thinking, critically thinking, and our body feels healthy, and they do try to pull these tricks, pandemics or bullying or trying to shut us in, we will cope, all of us around the world, far better, will we not, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think after the pandemic, people became aware of the slogan almost, do not comply. And I think we need to update this to say, do not rely. And what I mean by that is do not rely on institutions to provide for you. And when we talk about, I was interviewed a couple of years ago and somebody asked me what fear was to me, like what was fear? Or how I defined, not fear, freedom. How do I define freedom? And my answer, because it actually stumped me, and I said, I think for me, freedom is the absence of fear in my life. And when I don't have fear, I have the freedom to take action. And I have this mental clarity that without the fear, that suggests to me that I have that problem solved or I have opportunity and I can mentally thrive in that situation a lot better. So when we say do not rely, that means if I have food security, if I have water security, if I have shelter security that nobody can take away from me, and I'm providing all of those things for myself, that's a form of freedom through the lack of fear. And so when I'm not consumed by fear, I'm overwhelmed with freedom and happiness. And so this idea of do not rely is really sort of a bit of a guiding light to say, look at all the areas in my life where I might be reliant on the system. So what Michael and Barbara are talking about on the medical side, I have these concerns myself for certain family members, and I have taken steps to reduce that fear and to create more freedom around those medical situations. When I look at diet, and I think somebody in the chat mentioned seeds. A couple of years ago, people were trading in metals like crazy. I was actually out there buying seeds. I have a greenhouse. I can operate this year round if I want to, not currently where I am now, which is unfortunate. But there are things that you can do, even microgreens, having lots of microgreens. If you were to take a kale and grow a kale seed, with one seed, you could probably get 100,000 new seeds at the end of that season just from one kale plant alone. And, there are things that you can do to sustain yourself. And again, it's all about reducing your reliance on the system. Now, the last thing I'll say is I met a homesteader. I was on a Twitter Spaces or an X Spaces last week. In this family, he came on, he joined it. They're only out of the mountains in northern British Columbia for a couple of months out of the year. And so he happened to be there. He was listening on the show, and he said, when COVID happened, it was months before we even knew anything was going on. They came out of the mountains, they went into the city, and they're like, why is everyone wearing a mask? What's going on here? And it was months after the first lockdowns. So who's happier? The people suffering in their 50-story beehives in downtown Toronto, or the people that were providing 100% of everything that they needed to live a happy life in, maybe an isolated location, but they were there with family. They weren't there by themselves. One guy living in the mountains under a tree root. This is a real developed, flourishing community of people that said, we're not going to rely on the system. Now, how does this apply to preparedness? There's a dividing line between what a preparedness person would do. So the book I wrote is about preparedness for an emergency or civil unrest or war or many different domestic emergencies that can happen. That's a little bit of a different thing from homesteading, because in homesteading, you're living a life of preparedness. You're living the fruits of that labor every single day, and you're directly benefiting from the lack of reliance that you have on the system. Preparedness is an emergency happened. I have to execute my plan and get into a position where I'm safe, I'm sustainable, and I can recover from this over an extended period of time. And then I can figure out what the next step, which is hopefully learn from it and say, maybe I need to get out of the city and go buy a piece of land somewhere where I can start to do homesteading and on a full-time basis, stop relying on the system because I'm providing all my needs for myself. So what I like about what she's saying is in terms of the mental health, if you're living in fear, it's because you're reliant. The reason the government is attacking Barbara and Michael is because they want the reliance on the system to continue. And for anybody who's advocating for cutting that cord between, big pharma and nature is a direct threat to the bottom line. And so this is a tragedy. This is something that, I find personally disgusting, but the reality is if you don't rely, you're more free in many, many ways.
That is beautifully said. And Michael, you have stood in politics. You've seen that unscrupulous, dishonorable politicians use one thing above all else. The tyrants always use fear, don't they? The very thing that Tom is talking about.
Yes. And I came to realize that the well-being of the people is not high on their priority. Getting votes is high on their priority, and maintaining their job. And they are terrified of bad press. And as a consequence, they will scurry like rats to avoid at all costs any negative press on any subject. So if you're looking for bravery, it will be a minority. We have a few in Australia, some good men and women that will stand, but it is definitely a minority because the majority love their cozy little nest.
Anything that brings fear is never going to be our friend, and that includes politicians. So in these last few minutes that we have, how quickly this hour has gone, Jim, I'm going to begin with you, with your top 3 recommendations, picking up on what Tom has said. There's the preparedness now that's homesteading, and there's the preparedness if there is a sudden emergency. Jim, your 3 ideas.
Well, just some fantastic comments and examples of why it's so important not to be afraid. I love that story that Tom was talking about the people up in the mountains coming down and wondering what on earth was going on. You know, they were totally self-sufficient. Look, I will say this, it's about mindset. It's about how you think and how you look at things. You must develop critical thinking. You must look beyond the veil. And you've got to understand that the government's not there. They're not your friend. You do need to be independent from the system. And there's so much to do with preparedness. That's why there are so many people who are studying it now, because they recognize that there is something very, very valuable in having a little bit of food set aside, a little bit of medication set aside, and knowing how to store it, knowing how to use it. I think it's incredibly important. And what we are doing in Freedom Train International is teaching people to go beyond, go above and beyond where the system wants you to be. Step back from it, sidestep it, and start to live your life the way you want to live it, in freedom, without fear. So I think the very first thing that people who are watching this need to understand is when you're prepared, when you start to do little preparations, you suddenly get the realization dawning on you that you're actually no longer afraid. It's actually quite remarkable. The governments want us afraid. That's how they control us. And when you're afraid, you make the wrong decisions. You make poor decisions. So what Barbara and Michael are talking about is incredibly valuable, because that's a big part of preparedness, is being medically fit, both in your mind and in your body, but also spiritually as well. And I would just like to thank both Barbara and Michael, and of course Tom as well. It's always great to have you on the show with us, Tom. And once again, Liz, that's sort of my sort of closing remarks.
That's brilliant. Tom, very briefly from you, obviously step 1 for me in preparedness is buying your book, and I have Barbara's already, but I will be doing that. So very briefly, 3 practical things you would say to people thinking, well, what can I do today, Tom?
Well, one thing absolutely that you can do today is stop looking at it in terms of a lone wolf scenario. You can do this in groups. And, you know, I have several case studies in the book for different emergencies, but one of the case studies that I cite in the book is about a group that comes together, and they're partway through the process that I teach in the book. And remember, the book is a workbook, so you know, you get the book, you're going to have to actually go through the worksheets and produce your emergency plans for that. But one of the scenarios is, because I don't believe in the lone wolf scenario. I know that wolves travel in a pack for a reason, and lone wolves don't survive. So if your resources are short for your own personal circumstance, then go find like-minded people out there that you can do this with. You don't have to go it alone. Okay, that's what emergencies are about. Everybody's in the same boat. So deal with the emergency together. And so just, I guess the one thing I want to say is the very first chapter in this book talks about fear. It literally talks about the physiological effects of fear on the human body during a crisis or an emergency. So that's where we start in this book. And so I help to identify what's going to happen to you physically when a major emergency happens and you start to feel fear. By the time you come out the end of this book and you've created your first emergency plan, you will be full of confidence. That is going to be a lack of fear. And that plan, you print it off. And when the emergency happens, you are already going to know what to look for to trigger that plan. And so this is exactly how the military would do it. This is how FEMA does it, how Emergency Management Ontario, Alberta, this is how all the organizations do it. It's the same process. I just civilianized it. And to my knowledge, that's the first time that we've ever taken this process and put it into the hands of civilians. And there's a lot of case studies in this book to follow examples of ice storms, not really Barbara in Michael's problem, but it is for me in Canada. You know, there's floods, there's heat waves. We talk about civil unrest in the book. And the last thing I'll mention is I have a chapter in there about violence. And unfortunately, it is something that has to be considered. You have to have a good conversation, an honest and open conversation about violence in extreme emergencies. And you can just look at New Orleans for an example of that and some of the other things that have happened. So I know you asked me for 3 points, but I just wanted to tell people what they're going to get in the book if they do purchase this book and start putting their plans together. And I think what Barbara and Michael have done really meshes nicely with what the end result is going to be.
It's brilliant, Tom.
Yeah.
And Barbara, have you ever been to Canada? And if so, can we link you with Tom if you do go?
I have been to Canada. I've done meetings in Thunder Bay. I also did Williamstown. I think I did a series there. I think I might be going next year. I'm not
I've
sure.
got an idea on your next year's schedule. There is I saw a week in Canada somewhere along that schedule.
That's brilliant. We'll have to link you both together.
Sure.
So to finish with you both, the primary things for people who today want to take some steps. I'll start with you, Michael, very briefly, and then you, Barbara, to finish.
I don't think can be understated the value of if you're young, is moving into a better location where you can be not in the beehive, as you mentioned, Tom, just living there where you're subject. I made that move. I came under strong conviction when I was young. I had a conversion experience. I went from an atheist to a Christian. That actually changed my entire perspective on life. I then lost all fear, and I just sort of looked at everything that was happening around, and I realized, I read in the Bible where it says, woe unto them that build house to house, that lay field to field, that there be no place left for them to be alone with God in the earth. That's a quote in Isaiah. And I thought, I am going to relocate. So, and I did it years ago, and I'm so glad I did, because now we're in a position, I'm touching 70, and we have this place, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm seeing it's time to wrap up, but that's something that's very, very, and it's a great experience. It's been fantastic, the whole learning experience. I remember I just got a job on a property, and I was an electrician. I felt I was a very capable human being, and the owner of the property said to me, I don't know how a bloke got to be your age. I was 26 years old. He said, and be so useless. So
That's the Aussie way.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. And he gave you a gift.
I was useless in the country. I could operate in the city. Don't worry, drive here, drive there, do this, that. But out in the country, he said, like, you don't know how to do any fencing. You don't know how to use a chainsaw. He said, oh, crikey. He said, you thought I was useless.
That's absolutely brilliant advice for young people, along with the Charlie Kirk inspiration. Barbara, I know faith is the basis of your life, as it is for Charlie's. Your final words of advice to people today who want to really step up on this.
Well, I really like what Tom said, that freedom is the absence of fear. And the Bible says in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, God says, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Knowledge is power. And the decisions we make according to the information we have. So my aim is to give people more information. And when you've got that information and you look at the situation, you don't need to fear, because you know what to do. Love binds us together, and a sound mind weighs up the pros and cons and says, actually we don't have to fear, because we've got this. And I think one of the best kits people can start with is a little natural first aid kit. Yes, you've got bandages. Yes, you've got tweezers, but you've got cayenne pepper in there, which sprinkled into a wound will seal the bleeding. You've got charcoal in there, and charcoal absorbs and neutralizes poisons. And they're probably two of the main things I'll have in my first aid kit. My book, Sustain Me, it's got a poultice section. So these are excellent things to start with.
Barbara, I can't recommend this book enough. Sustain Me. And what an honor to have you all on. Thank you very much, and stay with us. Peter McIsaac is up next, and we are going through on prepping for this special for Freedom International today. Lovely to have you all with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank